Welcome to Kitchen Table Finance.
Hey, Dave. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Nick. How are you?
Doing well. Glad to have you back on the podcast here. It's been a minute.
Yeah.
Keep telling everyone you're on assignment. I'm not entirely sure what that means. So.
Right. I feel like I'm more of a guest on my own podcast now, or our podcast.
Yeah.
Never been solely mine.
We're glad to have you back. We actually you're gonna kind of take the lead today, from my understanding, right?
Yeah. So we've talked off and on over the years on the podcast about how we include life planning in our client process, and we've been doing that now for a few years. And I thought it'd be a good idea for me to more or less interview you as the main practitioner of that part of what we do, about what we've learned, how it's going, what that process looks like, how it's evolved over the last few years.
Sure.
And so we were just chatting before we started. You and I both attended a workshop, and we figured out the year was 2019. We had to go back and look at when a particular football team last played another particular football team, because I knew that was going on the same day. Turns out it was 2019. It was the University of Michigan playing Army that day, which was a lot more interesting than it should have been. But we both attended a conference workshop put on by George Kinder, who is the father, if you will, of the life planning process.
That's right.
And then you went on to then become a certified life planner.
Yeah, probably maybe 3 or 4 years prior to that. Across George Kinder's book, EVOKE,
Right.
And started reading that, and then started practicing or using some of those questions from that book, which I don't really recommend. Although George will tell you he's very kind about that stuff. He's like, yeah, I'd rather you read the book and use those questions and then to not, right? Probably go through the full training because you get a lot out of it, which now, having done that, I can tell you it does make a big difference. But he's always been really good about I'd rather have you stumble through these conversations than to not have them at all, right?
Well, I think the book's out of print now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And I think he made a comment somewhere along the line in there a few years ago that was intentional on his part.
Well, my understanding, and we might have to bring George on someday to clarify, was there was a publishing dispute with his co-author.
Oh, okay. So it was intentional, but not for the reasons I was thinking. Okay. You wanna talk a little bit about what that process looks like?
Yeah, so life planning in general, the process is based around George Kinder's EVOKE process, which he created as a practitioner, which essentially takes clients through these 5 stages, which he labels EVOKE. So the exploration meeting, the vision meeting, the obstacles meeting, the knowledge meeting, and the execution meeting.
Yes.
And so our process very closely aligns with that. The first 3 steps of that process, the EVO, we do with all new clients that are coming in to create a retirement plan. And then the back half of that, the knowledge and execution, we kind of take a team approach to. And that's the thing too about the EVOKE process, is everybody kind of does the K&E a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
EVO are kind of really structured around widening out and finding out and just talking about all of the things that are potentially important to you, and just kind of going surface level. Just give yourself some time to think about everything that is going on in life and what's important about it, and why you want that to be a part of your plan. And then the vision piece is really around the 3 questions that George came up with, and really just around kind of prioritizing all those things. And so the first step is to just throw everything against the proverbial dartboard, if you will. And then the next step is to really kind of fine tune and really kind of distill things down to what's most important to you, There's a grid worksheet where we call it your heart's core of what you absolutely have to have in your plan, or it's not worth having a plan kind of thing. And then the kind of the ought to and fun to side of things. And so really kind of prioritizing those. And then the third meeting, the obstacles meeting, really revolves around what is getting in your way. Like, what are the stumbling blocks? What's getting in your way of being able to do these things? And really kind of exploring all of those different obstacles and kind of creating a plan for each of them, or how you're going to solve those for you to be able to do the things that you need to and want to do in life.
Great. The first thing, like when I did that workshop with you, coming from like the old school investment centric kind of upbringing I had in the business, I was like, oh boy, people are never gonna get into this. This just doesn't. And I was really like, I love the idea. I loved it right from the start, but I always was, and I guess it's probably my introverted nature too. Is like
Sure.
this is going to be pushing people too far. What has been the client reaction since we started this kind of programming?
Yeah, it's surprisingly been very positive from the aspect of what we're really trying to do in a lot of ways is just give clients the space to actually think about these things and the feelings that it brings up. And, as you know, Dave, we do retirement planning. And it's always astonishing to me because we've just been trained so well by the industry and just by, society in general to here's what you do. You save money for retirement. All of a sudden, someday you have this big pile and then
Right,
you stop working and you can go do whatever you want, right?
right.
There's sailboats, there's happy couples in the sand, like all
Yeah,
the cliches of
yeah.
retirement that are
And
out there.
financial planning is the process of maximizing everything from your credit card rewards to your savings account to your 401k.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so it's just this very, for me, exciting time to be able to give people that time and space to just think through, like, what is this next step going to be, right? Like, we've got to this point, but we spent such little time thinking about it and thinking about what it means and what we want to do and what's most important to us. And so just having that space where we spend 3 meetings, anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5 hours, depending on how much stuff we go through, where we're just calmly taking that time and space to think about what this next transition is into
Yeah.
retirement, what we want to prioritize, what's most important to us, what are some of the things that, some of the regrets that we might have that we want to make sure we're taking advantage of the time that we have to be able to do those things so we don't have to live with those regrets. And
Yeah.
retirement is this great time to have that conversation because all of those possibilities are kind of open if you've
Yeah.
done a good job of, saving and you've come to that point in time where you have the ability now where you have potentially you're gaining some of that time back from not having to work as much if that's what is most important to you. And so it's really interesting from the client aspect of just seeing their minds kind of work through that and have that time and space to think about those things, because it's just so rare that we do it. And, we've had lots of different outcomes from people saying, I'm not really ready to retire.
Hmm.
I have the time, I have the
Yeah.
money, and I'm in that time of life where I could, but that's not really what I want, right? I still have some things that I want to do or accomplish or get out of my job. And we've got other people who are like, I
I
should have
can't
left
wait.
years
Yeah.
ago kind of thing,
Right.
right?
Right.
I'm ready for this next thing. And so it's super interesting because everybody is different. And I guess the biggest thing for me is, in going through and having all these conversations with people, it's never about the money, but it is about the money, right? It's never about the
Right.
money in that, like, the things that they truly want aren't things that are like, hey, we got to spend all this money or we got,
Yeah.
we need more money to be able to do this thing. A lot of times it's just those, it really kind of boils down to several different, like we could categorize almost all of them into 4 or 5 or 6 different categories of like family and relationship or creativity or place, or, there's all of these things, and they don't necessarily all have a lot
Yeah.
of money attached to them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. When it gets down to what's really important, you don't have to necessarily be a billionaire to make it work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of the typical responses, I think, to people before the process is, oh, we're going to boil this all down, and I'm just not going to be able to afford the dream vision
Yeah.
that, we're working towards. And as, looking at it mostly from the outside, as you've been more involved with that directly, that's not been the case.
Yeah.
That's not been the case.
Yeah, it's, and we've had this conversation before on this podcast, but a lot of our clients end up having more money than they necessarily
Right.
quote unquote need. And so then it's kind of this fun, like, okay, well, you told me that relationships with your family and time with your family is super important. Like, here's this pool of money. Like, how do we turn that into more experiences or more
Yeah.
time with them or more things that you can, you know what I mean? And so that's the really fun part of like,
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah.
you have this money and it's just a means to an end. And now that we know what your end is, like, let's find the best way to support that and be able to do some of those things that you want with those people. So it can be a really cool tool as well to use towards providing some of those things that you really want in your life.
Have there been any big surprises?
There's always, it's funny because, if you read the book, and George also has now a consumer facing book that is available and published called Life Planning for You, which is kind of you taking yourself through the process. And he tells all kinds of stories in there. And it's always interesting to me because, and it's maybe where we live or the clients that we get, but for most people, it's not like this big grandiose, like I want to travel the world kind of thing, or I want to, learn how to play guitar, become a comedian or something like off the wall. Like in the
A
book,
total
there's all those
change.
different
Yeah.
things, because if you're going to publish a book, it's got to be like this creating life-changing story. Right.
Right.
So for a lot of people, it's just the ability to continue doing what they're doing and not having to worry or the anxiety or the fear. And that's really cool too, right? Like,
Yeah.
when people come in and they're like, I really love and enjoy my life, and there's not a lot that I want to like change or need to change. I just need you to help me make sure we can keep doing it, and we can do it now, and we can do it in 5 years from now and 10 years from now. And maybe we can sprinkle in some of that, cool stuff, like taking a family trip that we probably wouldn't have. But for the most part, even if we didn't get to that point, like, we still really feel really good about where we are and how our lives going, and how we want to maximize this time we have in retirement. And I think that's really cool on itself, but it's not, it's not going to sell any books.
Right. It's kind of boring, but boring is good. I guess maybe that reflects our like Midwestern
Yeah, for sure.
roots here, but that's all right. I'm good with that. From a client reaction standpoint, I know, like, as because I'm involved with implementing the portfolios and the plans, that come out of this. I feel like the clients that have gone through this process have more buy-in. Not like they're getting really excited on a granular level about like how much we're putting in large cap stocks and that sort of thing, but just the idea that what we're doing isn't just to try to create a certain yield or a certain percent return, but to do these things that you've laid out. And it creates a different feeling, I think, when we start talking about the nuts and bolts of getting it done. I don't know, you've probably got a more insightful way to talk about that, or maybe other reactions you've seen.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to some of that, that transition from spender to saver, that transition into retirement. And there's all these things that we can do from a financial level that impact like the long-term trajectory of your plan, right? Like, if we're talking about, we could do Roth conversions, and we could do all this cool stuff that's going to give you more money sometime in the future, right? And I think for a lot of people, like, if you don't have that life planning conversation and figure out what's most important to you, you just kind of default back to I guess we'll do this because that's going to give me more money and a bigger net worth someday. And
Right.
with the life planning conversation, I've had this conversation with clients this year too, where it's like, we could do a Roth conversion because that might make sense for the future, but also you could take a distribution from your IRA and help your kids
And
now,
spend
or go
that.
take a trip now,
Yeah.
and like we're still doing that. We're still
In the
paying the
tax,
taxes at
from
the
a,
lower
right,
rate,
right. As the
right?
same tax
your
effect.
your like legacy might not like go up, but
Yeah.
maybe, and we had that conversation about the most important thing is being able to support your kids and to travel. And so in my estimation, that's a much better use of your money is to take that out and pay the taxes at the lower rate
Yeah.
now and use it for those things than it is to sock it in away in an account that you'll probably never need or use, that your kids are going to get when they're 70 and probably don't necessarily need it either, kind of thing. And so like those are the conversations that are meaningful, and that's where we get the buy-in, because if we're just making decisions in the vacuum of what the math says and how to maximize your net worth, we're missing the boat, right? Like,
right.
I can tell you
Right.
the answers to all those questions, but nobody's, I know people have heard this before, but the answer is live in a cardboard box and save and invest everything
Down by the river.
right? Like nobody's buying that. And so it's that balancing act of, and that's why having those conversations, prioritizing your goals. So we know when we make those decisions, when we talk about things like Roth conversions or whatever the strategy is that getting you further away or closer to your ultimate goal, which is, you told me X, Y, and Z. And how do we make sure that that is actually hitting the mark? And I think, to your point, Dave, that's why people follow the advice, because the advice isn't just about like money or investments or tax planning. It's about like, what do you want to get out of life? And how do we create the advice and move the pieces of the puzzle around to get you to be able to do more of that, and worry less about like what's going to happen in 20 years when you've got a $1 million IRA that your kids are going to inherit. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Let the strategy, the overall strategy, drive the tactics. Makes much more sense, much more clarity from the client's point of view. Have there been any, and maybe you can't answer this, without like tipping privacy issues, that sort of thing, but any real cool epiphanies or interesting things you've seen come out of the process where you're like, whoa, didn't see that coming? Or
there's been a couple where like just kind of out of left field. And part of the hard part of being of a financial life planner is you have to kind of check your biases at the door and really kind of open up to like, hey, whatever you come up with is better than whatever I'll come up with for you, right? And so I think where some of the off the wall stuff comes is like when it comes to like a creativity or something along those lines, where like that's not how my brain works and that's not what I would write down. And so, and that always kind of surprises me. It's like, oh, I never would have even thought of like that. But it's always super cool what people are into. And I think too, I've been surprised more kind of after the process of how much people appreciated it. I've been surprised by some people where it was like, I didn't think that they would like it. It's kind of one of those borderline, like, I'm not even sure this person's really here, or they're trying all that much, or they really care about this. And then we get through the process and like, man, thank you for doing that. Like that was amazing. I got so much out of it. I was like, and I have to like,
I've seen that. I've seen that with a couple people too, where they didn't seem like the type,
right,
if you will. But that brings up a good point. Like I find myself catching myself sometimes now that I've been doing this for like a quarter century, where like you'll make stereotypical assumptions about a client. Maybe you don't know them well or they're new based on past clients that maybe seem like they're in the same mold, about how conservative they are, what they value and what they don't. And really, I guess one way to look at it is what this process does is gives them the space to tell you that stuff right up front in their own words, instead of, the typical, like, well, let's talk about your risk tolerance and, what your goals are. And you're probably the same as Judy, who was in here 2 weeks ago. So you're probably
Sure.
your portfolio, you know what I mean? And it's easy to fall into those traps as a practitioner if you're not careful.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's,
What I would say is too, like what part of what I love about this process that we've created is like a lot of that stuff comes out, but it comes out like 3 or 4 or 5 years later when people get like comfortable enough with you to like have
right.
those
Yeah.
conversations.
I had you way too conservative all along because I made these assumptions, or the
Yeah.
other way around, and you find out the hard way when there's a correction, or I was thinking we needed to maximize Roth contribution or Roth conversions, because of what I assumed were your goals. And I
Yeah.
find out,
Right.
so yeah, it gets that stuff right up front in their own words before we really have a chance to presuppose.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I guess the other thing that I find interesting about this too is, you're kind of, putting down on paper, literally, like a bunch like goals and plans, and we both know that those pretty much get shredded pretty quick. What have you like how are you seeing, here we are, 4 years into implementing this more formally? Are you seeing a lot of change in those plans, or does it become, I guess, I'm asking kind of as another practitioner on the outside of this a little bit. Are you seeing the same evolution in planning for those people, or does it become more of a touchdown that, oh yeah, that's right, we talked about this, and that's really what I want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a couple people who have we've kind of gone back through the process, and as you know, like we just really suck as a species of like planning out long term, like what we're,
Yeah,
thinking about what we're going to want in 10 years from now is like it's like playing the lottery, right? Like
right.
chances are you're not going to be right, you're not going to win. And so I think a lot of that has really helped people kind of think through like where they are right now. And it's one of the reasons why part of the visioning process, like we set that vision out for like a year to a year and a half from now, because anything longer than that is just too long and there's too many things that potentially change. And so it's been interesting to see how people have kind of changed their plans. But one thing I'll tell you on this as well is I personally have been life planned several times and continue to do, within the registered life planning group, we're always doing continuing education and doing pieces and parts and life planning each other. And every time I go through that process again, I always learn something else about myself that's always kind
Cool.
of like surprising of like, and I never really thought
Yeah,
about that, but that does make sense. And that is probably something that I should think
yeah,
about. And so I think that's really cool too. Like just
yeah,
that fact that we just, and like you said, it's only been 4 years and so there's always different stuff coming up and we just generally don't take time to sit down and slow down and think about it. And so anytime, any opportunity that I've had to actually slow down and think about it, I've always learned something and had a good experience with figuring out more about what's important to me and what I want to and should be focusing on.
well, I guess what I would say, kind of to wrap things up is, this is something that's always interested me, and I really appreciate the fact that, like, I would never have implemented this on my own. So I appreciate your commitment to it, because I think it's meant a lot. I've seen a difference in our clients because of it. I think it's helped us all as a team kind of evolve how we think about financial planning, and I think it's really meant a lot for our clients. So thank you for that, and I'm glad you're as committed to it as you are, because you kind of pulled me along in a good way.
Yeah, it's
So
been a pleasure. It's one of the reasons why I'm excited to go to work every day and meet. I get to basically meet with new people quite frequently and figure out and like just open them up in terms of like what's most important to you. And it's always
yeah,
super interesting and fascinating to me and watching them go through that process and have that transformation and go through retirement and have that big, transition. And it's fascinating to me. And just the experiences and going along with people and doing that, and the connections that you make are awesome. And I'm also super excited that Cole is taking the first training, and he's continuing in that process of getting the RLP next year. And I think that's super exciting too, to have another young, registered life planner, just out in the world in general, let alone at our firm. I think is awesome, because there's more people that need these conversations than RLPs that exist. And so the more of them that we can help through that process, I think the better off the world will be, to be honest.
Great.
So.
Yeah, for sure. The shoe's on the other foot here. I'm not sure how to wrap these things up. You usually, play the host part so well on the podcast. But if anybody out there listening is interested in hearing more about this process, drop us a line. Obviously, we like to talk about it, right?
Yeah, for sure. SRBadvisors.com. As always, Dave, been a pleasure.
Nick. Yep.
Thank you for joining us for another chat about your retirement and finances. Please hit that subscribe button. You can also contact us at srbadvisors.com or email us at info@srbadvisors.com. See you next time on Kitchen Table Finance.
This is a Zedia Media production.